5 bone-chilling family massacres that still haunt investigators. Have you ever looked at a quiet family photo and thought, what really goes on behind those smiles? It's unsettling, right? We all want to believe that our homes, our families, are safe havens, places where love lives and darkness stays out. But sometimes, behind closed doors, something far more sinister brews: secrets, rage, and in rare, horrifying cases, a storm that ends in bloodshed. And when the people involved are family, it hits deeper. The betrayal cuts sharper. These aren't just crimes, they're shattering implosions of the very foundation we rely on for comfort. Today, we're diving into 5 bone-chilling family massacres that have left even the most seasoned investigators shaking their heads. These aren't just brutal crimes. They're stories that raise questions we may never be able to answer. What drives someone to destroy the people who knew them best? How do investigators piece together a crime so personal, so heartbreaking? I need you to stick with me on this one. What we're about to talk about isn't easy, but it's real. These stories matter, not just because of how terrifying they are, but because they remind us of how important it is to stay aware, even in the places we feel most safe. Let's start with a case that left an entire community in pieces, and still, to this day, feels like a nightmare no one can quite wake up from. It was July 4th weekend, 1987, when the small town of Athens, Wisconsin, was thrown into chaos. The Coons family, 5 members living in a rundown farmhouse, stopped answering calls. At first, it seemed like nothing. Maybe they were out, maybe they were busy. But when a family member went to check on them, what they found was horrifying beyond words. Inside the home, 4 family members, Helen Kuntz and her 3 adult children, were found shot execution-style in their beds. A 5th body, that of 30-year-old Randy Kuntz, was discovered later in the woods. The home looked like something out of a horror film, dark, cluttered, and soaked in silence. And yet, what made this even more terrifying wasn't just the brutality of it was the mystery. There was no clear motive, no obvious suspect, and the 6th family member, the matriarch, had vanished without a trace. Investigators dug deep. Family feuds, money issues, secret lives. But nothing stuck. There were rumors, whispers about incest, hidden bank accounts, and buried trauma, but none of it was enough to lead to a conviction. To this day, no one has been charged with the Coons family murders. The case still haunts Wisconsin investigators, especially because whoever did it knew the victims, knew how to move in silence, and knew that fear doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it sleeps just down the hall. Let's move to a case that's more recent, and somehow even harder to understand. In 2015, in the quiet town of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, the Bever family was living what many thought was a normal suburban life. David and April Bever had 7 children. From the outside, they seemed like a typical homeschooled Christian family, but inside that house, behind the white picket fence, something deeply wrong was brewing. One summer night, 18-year-old Robert Bever and his 16-year-old brother, Michael, carried out a plan they'd been crafting for months. With chilling precision, they murdered 5 of their family members, their parents and 3 younger siblings. The only survivors, a toddler and a teenage sister who, covered in blood, managed to escape and call for help. When police arrived, what they found was almost unthinkable. Blood smeared across walls, a trail of bodies, and 2 teenage boys calmly admitting to it. All. Their motive? According to Robert, it was fame. They wanted to surpass the infamy of past mass murderers. They had planned to kill even more people, and their own family was just the beginning. What makes the Bever case so deeply disturbing isn't just the savagery of the attack, it's the cold, emotionless calculation behind it. These weren't impulsive acts. They were rehearsed, written, out, practiced in the dark, while their parents slept just down the hall. And still, to this day, psychologists and investigators struggle to understand how 2 boys could grow up in the same house as their siblings, share dinner, holidays, birthdays, and then carry out something so monstrous. When we talk about true crime, we often focus on the big picture, The crime itself, the investigation, the trial. But cases like these demand we look closer, at the quiet signs, at the unspoken pain, and sometimes at the uncomfortable truth that monsters aren't always strangers. Sometimes they're blood. Now that we've walked through the horror of the Coons family's unsolved slaughter and the Bever brothers' calculated massacre, let's take a breath. I know, this is heavy, but we're just getting started. The next case takes us even deeper, into a household where love, religion, and fear collided in the worst way imaginable. Part 2. You're still here, and I'm glad you are. Because sometimes these stories feel too overwhelming, too dark to sit with for long, but staying with them matters. Behind every headline is a real family, real people, and the only way to make sense of this madness, even a little, is to look it in the eye and not look away. Let's talk about a case that shook the very core of a small religious town in Utah, the haunting tragedy of the Lafferty family. It was 1984 when Brenda Lafferty, a young, vibrant woman with dreams and determination, was found murdered in her own home in American Fork, Utah. She wasn't alone. Her 15-month-old daughter, Erica, was also found, lifeless, with her tiny neck slashed. It was the kind of brutality that instantly sends a community into shock. Who would do something like this to a mother and baby? The answer? Brenda's own brothers-in-law. Ron and Dan Lafferty, Brenda's husband's older brothers, were once seen as devout members of the Mormon faith. But somewhere along the line they veered off, way off, into their own radical beliefs. They broke away from the church, fell into extremist ideology, and convinced themselves that Brenda had to die. Why? Because she had the strength to stand up to them. She challenged their control, warned her husband against following them, and for that they believed she was a threat to God's will. Ron claimed he had received a revelation that Brenda and her child were obstacles in the way of their spiritual path. What followed wasn't just murder. It was ritualistic, personal, and carried out with horrifying calm. They entered Brenda's home while she was making lunch. Dan held her down while Ron wrapped a vacuum cord around her neck and forced her to the floor. Then came the knife. It wasn't quick. And when it was done, they turned to baby Erica, who was in her crib. Ron said it had to be done, and he did it without hesitation. This case doesn't just disturb, it shakes the soul. How do people go from religious devotion to calculated murder? How does ideology twist so far that it becomes justification for killing a baby? Even the investigators, hardened by years of crime scenes, were stunned. The details, the lack of remorse, stuck with them long after the trials ended. Dan Lafferty was sentenced to life in prison. Ron received the death penalty and spent decades appealing until he died of natural causes in 2019, but no sentence, no number of years behind bars can erase the chilling weight of this story. Brenda stood up for what was right and paid the ultimate price. And Erica, her life hadn't even begun. You might think that after hearing these stories, nothing could surprise you anymore. But true crime has a way of reminding us there's always another level of darkness. Let's go to New Jersey. The year is 1971. John List, a mild-mannered, bespectacled man with a strict religious upbringing, is facing financial ruin. He's lost his job. His debts are piling up. But instead of telling his family, instead of asking for help, he makes a decision that will forever label him one of the most infamous family killers in American history. On a cold November morning, John List picked up a gun and methodically executed his entire family, his wife, his mother, and his 3 teenage children, one by one. He waited for them to be alone, approached them calmly, and shot them in the back of the head. He even made lunch afterward. He cleaned up, turned on the lights, and then disappeared. Before leaving, he wrote a 5-page confession letter to his pastor. In it, he claimed that he didn't want his family to suffer the shame of poverty, that he believed killing them was the only way to save their souls. He even canceled mail delivery and informed the children's schools that the family was taking an extended trip. Days passed before anyone realized something was wrong. By the time the bodies were discovered, neatly arranged in sleeping bags in the ballroom of their mansion, John List was long gone. For 18 years he vanished, changed his name, got remarried, and built a whole new life in Virginia. It wasn't until America's Most Wanted aired a forensic sculpture of what he might look like that a neighbor recognized him. John was arrested in 1989, tried and sentenced to life in prison. What makes this case so haunting isn't just the calculated execution or the years of deception. It's that John List sat through Thanksgiving dinners with his children, helped with homework, shared church pews, all while harboring the belief that one day he'd kill them. He saw it not as murder, but as mercy, and that twisted logic still leaves people asking, how? These stories are not just about the crime, they're about the betrayal. The quiet, devastating betrayal that happens when the person you trust most becomes the one to fear, and it's that betrayal that leaves investigators and survivors haunted for decades. We've talked about the Kunz family, the Bever brothers, Brenda and baby Erica, and John List's chilling decision. Each case digs deeper into the psyche of killers who wore the mask of normalcy, who lived among their victims, loved them, or at least pretended to. Next, we'll dive into one last case, one that begins with the sound of sirens and ends with a mystery that still grips everyone who hears it. Part 3. By now, you've probably felt that sinking sensation, the one you get when you realize that the monsters we fear at night aren't hiding in the shadows. They're often sitting right at the dinner table. And the last case we're about to talk about, it's the one that still baffles seasoned detectives, the one with no trial, no arrest, and no clear motive. Just 5 lives gone, and a trail of questions that refuse to die. It was April 18, 2001 when police were called to a well-kept home in Columbia, South Carolina. A relative hadn't heard from the family in days. What officers found inside was worse than anyone imagined. The 5 members of the Smith family, parents and their 3 children, were all dead. The parents had been shot execution style, while the children, 2 teenage sons and a younger daughter, had each been killed in a similarly brutal fashion. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious struggle, and no clues left behind. Made the case even more unsettling was how calm and orderly the crime scene appeared. The family was positioned almost peacefully, as if whoever did this had taken their time. As if it wasn't a rushed robbery or a frenzied act of rage. It looked planned, cold, methodical. Investigators initially suspected someone close to the family. There's almost always a connection, right? But nothing added up. No financial trouble, no known enemies, no signs of abuse or discord within the household. The father worked a steady job. The mother was involved in local community events. The kids went to school, played sports, had friends. It was the picture of normalcy. But we've learned by now, normal means nothing. The case quickly turned into a labyrinth of dead ends. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. There were no security cameras, no fingerprints, no DNA left behind. Police conducted dozens of interviews, chased down every possible lead, and came up empty. Over time, the trail went cold, and the grief of that loss, of an entire family wiped out with no justice, settled like a storm cloud over the town. To this day, the Smith family murders remain unsolved. And here's the thing that sticks with you. When a case like this fades, from the headlines the public moves on. But the investigators, they don't forget. These are the kinds of cases that keep them up at night. That sit in the corner of their desks, collecting dust and haunting their memories. Some officers have confessed they still dream about it, that they see those faces, hear the silence of that home. Because unsolved doesn't mean forgotten. It means unfinished. It means a killer may still be out there, blending in, walking free. So what do we take from all of this? We've walked through 5 of the most bone-chilling family massacres investigators have ever faced, each one different, each one terrifying. From the slaughter of the Kunz family in their cluttered farmhouse to the Bever brothers' blood-soaked betrayal, from the religious fanaticism of the Lafferty brothers to the cold precision of John List and the lingering, unsolved mystery of the Smiths. What ties them together is the absolute horror of betrayal. Not from strangers, but from people who were supposed to protect, love, and cherish their family. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that evil often wears a familiar face. But so does courage. Brenda Lafferty's defiance. The investigators who refuse to give up on cold cases, and even people like you, yes, you, who choose to stay informed, aware, and watchful. That matters. These stories aren't easy to hear. They're not meant to be. But by sharing them, remembering the victims, and refusing to let their stories disappear, we make sure the evil that silenced them doesn't win. And now, I want to hear from you. Which case hit you the hardest? Do you believe justice can still be found for the unsolved ones? Leave a comment and let's talk about it. Because true crime isn't just about fear, it's about facing the dark and refusing to let it take over. If you found this video gripping, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got more stories to share, more mysteries to unravel, more victims to remember, and more truths to uncover. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and always look a little closer. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that feel a little too close to home.